In just a moment, we're going to start a 3-minute video, and then you'll know you have 3 minutes to get to your seat, and we'll kick this thing off. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
We've been around 25 years, and we can now look back and see some of the great things that have happened.
Utah is a great place to live today, but we didn't get here by accident.
What in the 80s was a major problem of economic decline in the 1990s then became a problem of dramatic growth in the state.
We want to grow faster and have jobs and homes and livings for everybody. But on the other side of the coin, we don't want to have more traffic and poorer air.
They started Envision Utah as an effort to look at the growth that was coming, consider the options for the future, and engage everyone in the state in planning for and preparing for the future.
It's easy to ask the public, what would you like your community to look like in the future? It's hard for them to visualize, well, this is what we have today, what else could it look like? But if you can hone in on these values, the things that we care about in our communities, the things that we want to retain, that gives us a lot of really good material to say, okay, here are the strategies that can advance and preserve those values.
What are their hopes and their dreams and their priorities for the future? Then we take what we learn about Utah's values and we look at all the different ways that we could shape Utah's future around those values. We create what we call scenarios, which are basically pictures of what the future could be. And we say, if we do X, Y, and Z, then the future might look like this. Or if we do something a little bit differently, then the future will also look a little bit differently. And then we take those scenarios and we give them to the public. We give everyone a voice. We bring everyone to the table and give them the chance to weigh in on what scenarios they want. It's not just about choosing what's your favorite. It's about learning what it takes to actually get to the futures that you might want.
I still get calls from other parts of the country asking about how did Utah do it? How did they become the gold standard?
The model and the process that Envision Utah created has been followed and copied and relied on across the country because it actually works. It had never been done before to that scale and with that much public engagement.
In Envision Utah speak, the process is a capital T and a capital P. It's the process.
That has percolated and become part of the way that we do all of our work in the planning space in this community.
The result of this process is a vision that has buy-in not just from a few select leaders, but from everyone across the state. And now we have a strategy and a plan to be able to make that happen.
Envision Utah's reputation and the success of our work creates a great base to go forward and tackle the challenges that we face today, but our work is never done. We're still a growing state. We still have challenges.
The future is always there to prepare for.
If you think about it, there's a pretty good chance you'll do it better than if you don't. If you just stand by and watch, you've no one to blame but yourself for what happens.
I've said before, and I still firmly believe, The best is yet to come.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you for being here. I always know that spring has arrived when it is the Envision Utah Spring Breakfast, so I hope you are all feeling the same way, and we have a great day outside, so we will enjoy our time here together before we cut you all out to enjoy some of the good weather. My name is Amanda Covington. I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer for the Larry H. Miller Company, and I serve on the Envision Utah Executive Committee. And I have the privilege of welcoming all of you here this morning. As you know, Envision Utah is a nonprofit organization made of residents who work together to make sure Utah is a great place to live now and well into the future. Together we work to anticipate the potential challenges and opportunities, the future that faces Utah, and we find ways to make Utah a place where our children and our grandchildren will be happy to be here and call home. Today's event is not primarily a fundraiser. We do this more to bring the community together to think about big issues that will impact the future and encourage all of us to think about our role in shaping it. But the event is a little bit of a fundraiser. We are a nonprofit, as I said, and we always appreciate your financial support. There's a QR code on your table that will take you to our donation page, and we would be grateful for any financial support you can give. Right now, we are raising funds to conduct a values research study around water in Utah, and any support you provide today will go directly toward that work. Again, you can access the QR code on your table for the donation information, but also for today's agenda. If you look at the agenda, you'll see that it's jam-packed, and we will not be taking a dining break, so please feel free to enjoy your breakfast as we go. Most importantly, I want to thank and pay some gratitude toward the sponsors who are here today. Our gold sponsor is Goldman Sachs. Silver sponsors are Deseret Management Corporation and Larry H. Miller Real Estate. Our bronze sponsors are Cowboy Partners, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, the Janet Quincy Lawson Institute for Land, Water, and Air at Utah State University, R Plus Energies, and Prepare 60. Please join me in thanking these sponsors. We also owe special thanks to the George S. and Dolores Dore Eccles Foundation, who has been a bedrock supporter of Envision Utah for more than 25 years. Before I turn the mic over to Envision Utah's President and CEO, Ari Bruning, I want to say a few words about today's program. I hope by now it's no surprise that today's event is all about the future of water. There is an old saying attributed to Mark Twain that says, "Whiskey is for drinking, but water is for fighting." In a state like Utah, there's a lot we could fight about when it comes to water, but fighting is not the way we solve things here. Instead, Envision Utah has helped us build our future on a foundation of listening and collaboration. That's what I invite everyone here today to do. Please listen, but listen with an ear tuned to solutions about the future. What are our biggest threats? What are the problems that need to be solved? And what are the solutions that are already there? How can we work together to create a future where families, communities, and the economy will all have enough water for us to survive? And what can you do in creating a future where water plays a significant role in our state? Thank you again for being here. I look forward to working with all of you on the future of Utah's water, and I'll turn the time over to Ari. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you to all of you for being here. It shows your interest in the future of Utah. And I once again want to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors and funders are who make this event possible and who make our work possible. Now I want to talk a little bit about our work. This is why we exist. This is my mom with her 7 kids, and my parents are one of the key causes of growth in Utah. 7 kids. And yet, my mom often complains to me about the growth in Utah. You might have had that same experience yourselves. The last census showed that we were the fastest growing state in the country, percentage-wise. And if you extend that out, We're looking to add about 2 million people by 2060. Now, why do we grow? Why is it that all that growth happens? Well, it's because we're a great place. We have strong communities. We have family-friendly communities. We have friendly, kind people. We have a prosperous economy. We have beautiful outdoors and an unmatched recreation. And because we're such a great place, our children stay. Other people come join us. And that growth then creates some challenges. Challenges for those very things that make Utah great. You can think about those challenges. Housing costs, water, we talked about water today, traffic, access to recreation. And because of those challenges, we at Envision Utah are partnering with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, among others, to conduct what we're calling Guiding Our Growth. It's a statewide conversation about Utah's future. So we can all come together, think about what the future looks like, and come up with a target and some big strategies that will help us get there to make sure that we retain a high quality of life. So I invite all of you, if you haven't already, to go to guidingourgrowth.utah.gov and be heard. There's a survey there that you can take, and we will take the results of this survey and use it to create a set of strategies for guiding Utah's growth in ways that support great communities and great opportunities for current and future residents. So take the survey yourself and then ask everybody else you know to also participate. And if you would like some materials to include this in social media posts or newsletters, please reach out. We have those materials available for you. Now I wanted to share, we're getting some great comments in this survey. A lot of helpful, constructive comments. Just put a few on the slide of the many, many hundreds that we've gotten. We've also gotten some other comments. Somebody feels strongly about pickleball. This one, I love to hear what our panel has to say about this one. Or my personal favorite. I want to ask this person, how would we figure out which of the Californians are the stupid ones? I mean, is this give them an IQ test or something? And then, maybe more important, then how would we go about keeping them out of the state? How would we keep them or anybody else out of the state? Now, in all seriousness, we really appreciate all the comments we get and the opinions that people have, even if they don't like pickleball. So, picking up on this comment, we get a lot of comments from people, why don't we just stop growing? And I want to share with you a case study. So this is the question that Southern California asked themselves in the last century. And they set about to try to stop growth. So from 1960 to 1990, the city of Los Angeles, through its planning and zoning, reduced the population capacity of the city by 60%. So they basically downzoned the entire city. And on top of that, there was state law changes that made it a lot harder to get projects approved. Often you have to go through multiple lawsuits to get a housing project approved. So what happened? Well, here was the development footprint in 1938. Here it is in 1992. Basically, you squeeze the balloon, and it goes somewhere else. The people you didn't zone for don't disappear. They find another place to go. And it goes farther out, and they drive farther, and that creates traffic. And then, by the way, because they were so focused on trying to stop the growth rather than planning for it, they didn't plan very well for it. And we've all experienced the results, the traffic. But the zoning restrictions did reduce the amount of housing built, created a housing shortage, which eventually managed to slow growth. So here's our California population over time. You can see in recent years, actually, eventually it worked. Now, why did it work? Here's why. If you are a median income household in Los Angeles, you can afford 2.2% of the homes. Think about that for a minute. Median income household, this is not a low income household, median income household can afford 2.2% of the homes. So they eventually slowed growth by making it unaffordable, which really gets at the truth of trying to stop growth. You can only do it by getting rid of those things that make the place attractive in the first place. Now, what happens then when it's that unaffordable? Well, what happens is, number one, people spend a whole bunch of their income on their housing. Number two, they end up overcrowded because they might settle for a unit that's smaller than what they need. They might have multi-generational households living together. Some of you might be experiencing that, by the way, with your kids in your basement, maybe. Yeah. And so you have a lot of overcrowding going on. So really, that's why Envision Utah's tagline isn't, should we grow? It's how we grow matters. It's all about deciding how we can accommodate this growth in a way that maintains our high quality of life. So now I want to turn to the topic that's the focus of our breakfast, which is water. Why are we talking about water? Well, maybe it's obvious, but we asked Utahns to rate the importance of different issues in 2021, and water came out at the top. Now you might think, oh, that was 2021, the drought was really salient. Well, in 2014, we asked the same question, water came out at the top. So that's why Governor Gary Herbert requested that we undertake an effort to create a recommended state water strategy. We brought together 35 water experts from a variety of diverse perspectives, and it took 4 years. To get everybody on the same page to come up with a recommended state water strategy. But in 2017, we delivered that document to Governor Herbert, and it is just as relevant today as it was in 2017, and it's had a tremendous impact. And by the way, 3 of the panelists today were the chairs of that effort. We wanted to bring them back together. So now I'm going to show you some slides that show all the strategies in that document that, as far as we can tell, are happening. They're underway. They're not done. There's more work to be done. Now, warning, there are 7 slides. So you're not going to be able to read all of these. But I want to highlight just a few things that have happened. So to promote conservation, the state has allocated $270 million for secondary water metering and $270 million for agricultural water optimization over the past few years. We now have a Colorado River Commissioner and a Great Salt Lake Commissioner. In fact, Brian Steed was just named the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. He's here today. Congratulations, Brian. Or maybe condolences, Brian. I don't know which. We've also significantly expanded the ability to protect in-stream flows, which historically were treated as wasted water. So we have new mechanisms like private water leasing, water banking, split-season leasing. We also now have water basin councils to help plan our watersheds and a Great Salt Lake Trust. So that's just to highlight a few of the things that have happened. So we're going to go through all 7 slides. There we go. Now I want to share a little more about things that we've learned about water at Envision Utah and our various planning efforts over the years. So this slide is from our Your Utah, Your Future statewide effort in 2015. And we asked Utahns to allocate 100 points across different priorities. And the takeaway is Utahns would prefer to take water from their lawns rather than taking it from agriculture or the environment. So you can see the top outcome, the outcome that got the most points was ensuring there's plenty of water for farms and food production. And the 2 that got the fewest points were ensuring we have sufficient grass and other greenery and ensuring we have large yards. Another thing we've learned through multiple planning projects is that Utahns are ready and willing to implement local scaping in their yards. Now you might ask, what's local scaping? Well, local scaping is a shift. We shift the paradigm from the default ground cover is grass to the default ground cover is native low water plants, and grass is reserved for high use areas. Another thing we've learned, and this is a pretty complicated slide, but This is scenarios we modeled in Utah County for the year 2050. And we found that just by allowing the market to move to smaller lots, townhomes, and so forth, we could reduce water use in Utah County by about 25% without any changes to landscaping, just by letting the market shift that direction. You just have less area to irrigate. And then the last thing I wanted to share, we've been working on disaster resilience for the last few years, and we've learned that the 4 aqueducts that bring water to over 2 million people on the Wasatch Front are at high risk of disruption in an earthquake. So potentially we could have over 1 million people without water for as much as 6 months. Now, the legislature has now allocated about $50 million to help address this problem, which is about 1/3 of the money that's needed. So we're making progress. We have more that we still need to do. So now, water, we've done a lot of work on water in our various planning efforts, and it's too important an issue for the future of our state for Envision Utah to ever say our work is done. So now we're looking to raise money for a values study, as Amanda mentioned, to understand Utahns' values, priorities, and attitudes related to water. And our values research goes much deeper than most polling. So we use a series of qualitative and quantitative research to figure out not just what people care about, but why. So we invite you, if you can, to help contribute to funding that values study. Every bit helps. And now on to our main event. So water is such a big topic that we knew we needed more than just one person to talk to us about it. So instead, we've brought together collective decades of experience on water. You'll also notice if you look at their bios in the program that they bring a variety of experience and perspectives. They have experience in the Great Salt Lake, agriculture, municipal and industrial water use, water delivery and infrastructure, natural resources, water rights, and more. And we're also thrilled to have Teresa Foxley, one of Envision Utah's vice chairs, to moderate our panel discussion today. She's brilliant, and we expect she'll help us make sense of this complex topic. So I'd like to invite Teresa and our 4 panelists to the stage.
Well, thank you so much, Ari, for setting the stage, and thank you also, Amanda, for the great overview. A couple of things that really stood out to me as we were setting up the presentation today are this. Envision Utah is incredible at bringing together diverse and different voices and trying to find collaborative solutions. It's what we do at Envision Utah. It's how we do things in Utah. And I am really so honored to be here today with such a distinguished panel who really collectively has over probably 150 years worth of experience. And they will bring a diverse perspective to this conversation, and we're going to have a great time.
150 years, that's all.
That's all Tage. Well, let's introduce Tage. I think Tage is a giant in Utah's water supply world. Before retiring recently, he managed the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, and he has spent over 35 years in the water supply industry. Tage has received accolades from the National Water Resources Association. He's also received accolades from the American Water Resources Association and the American Water Works Association. So he has a trophy case at home that is chock full. Our group, Envision Utah, first got to know Tage when he was one of 3 chairs of the State Water Strategy Advisory Team. And as Ari already mentioned, three of those co-chairs are up here with us today. Seated next to Tage is Teresa Wilhelmsen. It's pretty infrequent that you get 2 Teresas, so 2 for you all today. But she is Utah's state engineer and the director of the Division of Water Rights. If you aren't familiar with the role that the state engineer plays, Teresa is in charge. She's in charge of measuring, apportioning, and distributing water in the state. In other words, you might have thought that water comes from snowpack, reservoirs, and streams, but it actually comes from Teresa has been a dedicated and well-respected public servant for her entire career, starting with SITLA, moving to the Division of Forestry, and now having spent the last 25 years at the Division of Water Rights. And thank you for serving on our board of directors. Next to Teresa is Tim Hawks, and he is our resident Great Salt Lake expert today. He's the general counsel for the Great Salt Lake Brine Shrimp Cooperative, where he works to help protect and restore the Great Salt Lake. Tim has spent 2 decades on water law, including 8 years in Utah's legislature, where he really ran point on Great Salt Lake and other water-related issues, all the while spending 10 years running Trout Unlimited in Utah. Tim has really made a reputation for himself in Utah as a trusted and wise expert in all things related to water policy, and he was also a co-chair of the State Water Advisory Team. And then finally, we have Warren Peterson here, who really does not need much of an introduction in any room in the state of Utah. But if you haven't met him, do. He will tell you all about his rural agriculture and background. Warren studied law. Well, I don't have him here. He's a proud Aggie. I need to include that. A proud Aggie, studied law, and has built a career as an agricultural water expert in Utah. Has always very kindly mentored folks at organizations like ours, Envision Utah, EDC Utah, and others on how to think about water use. But before retiring, and I do put that in air quotes, Warren was the vice president of Farmland Reserve, which is an international farm management and food production company. He's worked with a long list of boards and task forces that have something to do with water in Utah, and was also co-chair of the State Water Strategy Advisory Team. So if you want to know anything else about these panelists or their bios, there is the QR code on your table. Feel free to scan those. And also take note that on your table there is a phone number. I'll read it to you though. The phone number is 801-303-1453. I can't wait to dive in and ask these folks a couple of questions, but we will reserve a little bit of time at the end of today's session to take some audience Q&A. So be thinking of those as we go throughout. Again, excited to dive into this topic. I can't think of a more pertinent conversation for Envision Utah to convene us all around. So let's start, though, with something that is on all of our minds, and it's this winter. We had record-breaking snowpack. Skiers rejoiced, snow shovelers bemoaned, but it seems to be just what we needed this year for the Great Salt Lake and the Colorado rivers. But let's put this year into context. How much did this year help the Utah drought situation, the western drought situation? Was it a trend? Will we start to see a trend? Was it an anomaly? So let's start with that, and I want to open that question up to the entire panel. I'm going to ask you to go first, Tage.
Sure. It means a great deal to the water supply, as you might imagine. I'm looking out in the audience. I see several of our water managers here today, and I think they would tell you the same thing, and that is that drought is something that we experience obviously over the time and over the cycles, but we also experience these wet years from time to time as well. So it's not unusual for Utah to see these swings from one side to the other in terms of water supply. The thing that we rarely experience is average. It's either one extreme or the other. And this year, certainly, we know that the water supply has come back in a strong way. Most of the northern Utah reservoirs will fill, which means that we're going into a time when we have a year or so of storage left. I think one of the messages, though, that we always caution when we talk about wet years is that we don't want a public who is responding to a wet year or to a dry year. What we'd like to see is an ethic that we're using less water regardless of the type of year, because this year's a great example. If we have storage this year, we'd certainly like to save as much of that as possible for next year and the year after, and not just use it with reckless abandon just because we had a good year.
So I'll go next. And just echoing what Tage just said, but I think we also have to keep in mind one of the things that I'm seeing with this year, it is an incredible water year. And we've been able to fill some reservoirs that haven't been filled, but it's not necessarily across the state. The statewide SWE or snow water equivalent is higher than in the 80s. But for example, the Sevier River Basin, where our friend Warren lives, they didn't reach that same high level. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to end the season with a full supply. So I think it just echoes that even though if you're in an area where you're seeing these real high water years, that we just have to be prepared and not just overuse, but have that consistent conservation on our minds. So
I describe it as a much-needed breather, and just that, which is, if you think about it, it's quite likely that we'll get back into a dry cycle, and because the drivers that got us there in the first place are still there. People ask me what it means for the Great Salt Lake, and a lot of people are like, hey, the lake's full. This is great. The truth of the matter is it buys us a year, maybe two. People need to remember we were in a very deep hole, and so we've been digging out of that hole, but it would only take another dry year or two, and we'd be right back into the kind of crisis mode that we were in just 6 months ago. So we need to take it with a grain of salt. I think it's very likely that this is kind of an aberrant year, and we go back into a dry cycle.
Just to endorse all of what's been said, I'd add these thoughts. Don't get used to it. Behave as though every year's a dry year and work in that direction. And then I'll quote a farmer friend. I said, what are the best 2 years in farming? Let's adapt this to water. So 2011 was a really good year in farming and water. And next year. But just to show how this plays out in the most people know where Yuba Reservoir is, but to water users, that's Sevier Bridge Reservoir with its 120-year-old dam, and the dam safety program, and that is spelled with 3 letters, lest there be any doubt, looked like a good year because last year the reservoir, Teresa, I don't remember the capacity, 2%, but what's the capacity of the reservoir? It's like 230,000 acre feet. It's a big reservoir. And so it looked like a really good year to do dam safety work, and so the dam's all torn apart and you get record snowfall. So it's life in Utah, life in a desert. Be adaptive. Don't get used to a wet year.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll mark this on the possible anomaly side, and let's think about ways that we can continue to modify our behavior as if we're always operating in an aridification situation. We talked about this a little bit, touched upon it, Tage touched upon it just now related to Yuba, but I want to talk now about water infrastructure. And we have already seen a lot of flooding this year with the runoff that has already begun to occur. So Tage and Teresa, I would like to ask you all about our water infrastructure. And when I refer to water infrastructure, of course, we mean anything from water capture to storage to delivery to reuse and recycling. And let's think sort of big picture here. Of course, we're very known in Utah for having been forward thinking about water infrastructure when the pioneers rolled into this place. We're the pioneers today. And so what does the future of our water infrastructure need to look like? And let's start with that. Let's start with that. And Teresa, why don't you please go ahead?
Sure, so I'll start. And I think that you're absolutely right with the statements that you just made. As water managers, we are looking at the snowpack and are incredibly grateful for this year. But I think, and our generational infrastructure that our forefathers thought of and built that we have and that we rely on. There's no doubt that has carried us through these last 3 years, and including the water rights system that we have. With the rules that have been established, I can look at a system and understand how you can move what parts of a system to not impact the other based on this water rights system. And I'm a full advocate for it. Because I think it sets those ground rules that we know how to adapt by looking at what that existing system is and how can we modify within that system. But at least we have a set level of rules. But I think also one of the big things that as water managers now that we have to think about, every time we talk about drought, we look at reservoir storage. And it's easy to see that. It's easy to manage the things we can see. The things we can't see become much more difficult, and that's our groundwater. And I think moving into the future, we really have to get a better understanding of what our groundwater is, how much do we have, what is the safe yield of the aquifers. We just simply can't groundwater our way out of drought. And so I think we just have to keep that in mind and make sure that we have a full understanding of our supply.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. As you mentioned, the pioneers discovered when they came to this area that the water that we use occurs in a very small and specific place, but the population doesn't necessarily match that. So we were automatically and instantly transporting water long distances to get it to where we can use it. That's certainly the case today. One thing about our infrastructure in the statewide is that it's getting older. Right now, if you wanted to do some sort of an average of the age of all the pipes, all the dams, all the reservoirs and other things that we have out there, it's something like 45 or 50 years old. It's the oldest our water infrastructure has ever been in the history of the state. So we're going to have to keep in mind that it's not just building new infrastructure to meet growth and other needs, it's also replacing what we already have in the ground. And that's where the biggest bill is. Just a couple of numbers, $38 billion is what has been estimated for water infrastructure between now and 2060. That's a billion with a B. I don't even know how to quantify that in my mind. But of that 38 billion, somewhere around 22 to 24 billion of that is just repair and replacement of the existing infrastructure to keep the water coming to our taps. And so there's a big bill coming, one that we have to be ahead of. Now there's good news there. The large water agencies in this state have master plans, they have capital improvement plans, and they've budgeted for these kinds of improvements. But it's going to be a Herculean type of a task to go. One other thing, we were very foresightful when we built reservoirs and other facilities in the past for our use. We used our federal partners to do that, largely in northern Utah. Most of the dams and reservoirs upstream that use that critical storage were built in partnership with the federal government and now have been turned over to the local agencies. The repair and replacement bill will not be partnered with the federal partners. They're gone. And so this repair and replacement bill is squarely on Utahns to go forward.
Those are big numbers, and ones that we need to get our arms around and to understand some funding streams for those. I'm probably going to use some bad puns today too. I should have disclosed that. But let's talk about a smaller number than all of that replacement cost, but a pretty big number, all things considered. And that is that the legislature allocated $50 million to start upgrading some of those major aqueducts. Remember that picture that Ari had in his slide deck of the aqueduct installation? Envision Utah has been leading this conversation around disaster resilience, and so I do want to just make sure we touch on infrastructure and water infrastructure and disaster resilience. Let's give any legislators in the room a round of applause. That is awesome. But what will that funding do to help with our infrastructure resiliency?
Sure, I mean, those are very important things. The legislature has done a yeoman's job. I think they've just done really well in the last few years with cooperating in the water discussion, and they've applied money in so many important places. Water conservation being one of them, obviously, but also the monies that you're talking about, Teresa, with the infrastructure. There are critical components of the infrastructure that we just cannot do without. What I call them is lifelines. And largely those are the aqueducts that run across the Wasatch Front and through seismic areas, seismic active areas, and do need attention. It's important to note there are really about 6 or 7 pipelines that supply probably 75 to 80% of the state's population. And we're going to have to pay particular attention to those, not just in keeping them healthy and in good repair, but also locating them in places where the seismic impacts are not as great.
Thanks, Tage. I want to maybe switch topics a little bit here and Tim, bring you into the conversation. You cannot open a national news app without reading a story on the Great Salt Lake. Some headlines are sensational. And Tim, this has been something that we've seen in the New York Times, NPR, Los Angeles Times, et cetera, et cetera. It is no secret that the lake is at its hit an historic low point last year. There was a report issued that indicated that the lake could even dry up within the next 5 years. This created a lot of concern locally, a lot of concern nationally, and the lake is a national interest given all of the environmental issues around it, migratory birds, et cetera. Not to mention skiing. But can we talk a little bit about the Great Salt Lake? Give us a little bit of an overview of the current status and what needs to be done to preserve the lake.
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of put in perspective where the lake is now is to go back 6 months when the lake hit record lows. And, it's a fairly simple ecosystem out there in Gilbert Bay, which is the main body of the lake. You have algae at the bottom, and then you have brine shrimp and brine flies by the trillions. I mean, there's tons of them, right? And then tens of millions of migratory birds really rely on that as sort of their fuel. It's a stopover. It's like a gas station on their annual migrations, right? And last summer and into last fall, the brine shrimp, they hung in there, but they were on the ropes. I mean, it's been a couple of rough years for brine shrimp. Brine flies were they were like out for the count. They disappeared in large portions of the lake. You just couldn't find them. Researchers were looking for them. That has serious implications, of course, for the birds that rely on them. Things got so dire that the only real working harbor, so getting access to the lake, was the brine shrimp harbor on Promontory Point. At one point, the state's plan, if a plane was to crash in the body of the lake, was to drive all the way up around to Promontory Point to access the only working harbor, which isn't a really good sort of public safety approach. So things were getting really, really dire. It's been fantastic to see what started out as just an okay water year just get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Like I said, it's just clawed us back and sort of to a position that we were in just 2 or 3 years ago. And that's the good news. And I will just say, it is pretty amazing to see how fast that ecosystem rebounds. So for example, we survey brine shrimp. They're hatching out a month earlier than they did the year before because they're not so stressed by salinity. And of course, that's great for keeping the dust down and access to the lake and for all the industries that rely on the lake as well. So that's the good news. We're coming back. But long-term sustainability is a whole new kind of discussion.
Let's unpack that a little bit. What does long-term sustainability look like, and who and what has the biggest impact on the lake?
Well, everybody in this room has the biggest impact on the lake. And there was a really great report, if you haven't seen it yet. It was put together by the Great Salt Lake Strike Team, which was a collaboration between Utah State and the University of Utah researchers, and sort of looking at some critical questions about the lake. And they said something that was both discouraging and encouraging. And the discouraging thing was, it says, hey, it's human impacts really that are affecting the lake. The lake itself has great resiliency. It's a vibrant ecosystem, and it has a big safety cushion, margin for error sort of built into it. Human use has really taken away that safety cushion, that margin of error. So that's the bad news. The good news is that if we got us into this situation, we, the collective we can also get ourselves out of it. And I think but it's going to take doing things differently. Envision Utah likes to say how we grow matters, and I like to think, when you think about if you want to save Great Salt Lake, you kind of have 3 choices. You can grow dumb, and by that I mean continue to grow big lots with lots of green grass. So you can have that. You can have agriculture, or you can have the environment, but you can't have all 3. Because something's got to give. So if we grow like we've been growing to date, you're going to have to either get rid of your agriculture or you're going to have to kill the environment. But if you want to save Great Salt Lake, and you want to continue to grow, and you want to preserve agriculture, which we know is really important to a lot of people in the state of Utah, we've just got to be better. We cannot have the kind of yards that we've had, the kind of huge lots that we've had. We need agriculture to get smarter and better and incorporate a lot of new technologies. And we all have to do that. It can't be solved, as some people like to think, just on the backs of one interest or another. It has to be all of us working together.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Tim. This does sound like a great place for Envision Utah to play to help balance some of those interests. Let's put a pin in the discussion around agricultural and new technologies there, Warren, because I do want to come back to that. But before we leave this topic of sort of national interest in the Western water ecosystem, I do want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River. So, Teresa, I have some questions for you. 7 Western states rely on the river, but so many more Americans rely on the river due to all of the agricultural production that comes from it. And tensions are high, like really, really high, particularly with some of the lower basin states and those downstream. I would love to get your view on how Utah will be affected by what is going on today with negotiations pertaining to the Colorado River.
Yeah. So maybe what I'll say, tensions may be high, but I guess I'd rather describe it as all water managers within 7 states and 2 countries and many tribes are on high alert and working together. We have to do that. We have a system of laws on the Colorado River, starting with the Colorado River Compact in 1922, and building on that since then. I think there's a lot of disagreement on the river between the states right now, but every day there are conversations that are going on, trying to find that common ground. I think the main thing in keeping people at the table is that finding a solution together is a much better solution than having it determined by a court. And that is one of the issues that we need to avoid happening, because that will just drag out for decades if we do have to settle things in court. So I'm not saying that the conversations are easy. They're very, very difficult. But I think for Utah, we are in a better position, an improved position maybe. Many of you know Gene Shawcroft. He is our river commissioner for the Colorado River system, and he's in many of these discussions. But we also have a new entity that was created, which is the Colorado River Authority of Utah. That gave us some much-needed bandwidth within the state to help address these issues. 5 years ago, I don't think we even had a lot of these issues and the discussions that we have on our minds every day now. We didn't even envision them as to what we're going through today. So the Colorado River Authority of Utah handles those interstate discussions and work. And then as state engineer, I work on the intrastate to help educate, prepare Utah if there are cuts to come and what those cuts may look like. And it is terrifying when you look at the water rights. One of the key dates in the Colorado Compact is November 24th of 1922. Any rights that were developed or applied for after that date are subject to curtailment. What that means on these tributaries in the Colorado is that those rivers or those communities are going to be operating on direct flow of the river, not storage. And we rely so much on our storage to get us through like the last 3 years. And let me just kind of throw out some numbers if we have some time. They are expecting this year that there's going to be about 14 million acre feet that will hit Lake Powell, and anticipating rises of between 50 to 70 feet in elevation. That only gets us to about 37% of capacity. So even with this high year of this runoff, there's only going to be 37% capacity in Lake Powell. Now that's a projection. Things can change, but I think it just demonstrates that we have to keep focused on using our water wisely and planning. So,
thanks, Teresa. Warren, let's pick up on the, well, Tim, I think you teed it up for us really well. We are balancing these interests of environment, growth, residential and industrial, and agriculture. And Warren, I would love to talk a little bit about agriculture and the way that, the role that agriculture plays in our water today, and what your vision for the future of agricultural water use. We hear words a lot like ag optimization. We hear a lot about new technologies. We know our state leaders have been to Mexico and Israel and are really looking at global best practices. And I'm just very curious about how you are thinking about this topic.
Oh my. Plug a quarter in that jukebox and let it roll. Well, first of all, Jason, can you pull up a slide for me, please? Yeah. So Tim set this up really well. Agriculture needs to do more with water management. And if that, yeah, I've used this chart for a while, so, but it's the last time that I've seen, I'd like to update it, but it's the last time I've seen this. Now, what the chart shows is that according to USDA's index of farm inputs, we're staying at about the same level. Now, labor, seed, fertilizer, fuel, tractors, and so on all go into this, and money. But look what agriculture's doing with the inputs. We're getting better all the time, and we need to keep doing that. And in Utah, with water being our limiting resource factor, we need to do it with water. Now, Teresa touched on the Colorado River affecting what's on your table this morning. 50% of the agriculture in the United States, 50% measured by dollar value, comes from irrigated agriculture. Also, 50% of the value in food production in the United States comes from California's Central Valley, measured by. So what we do to the Colorado River and the amount of irrigation that occurs in the Central Valley of California is really something that, Teresa, you're gonna have to rein me in here, so do it when you need to. But think about farmers. Let's talk about agriculture and let's talk about water. We use, in the west of the 100th meridian, all of the states west of the 100th meridian, except Texas, most of the water taken for human use. Now, that's not most of our water, because we take less than 10%. And the 10% we take, look at the impact it has. So we ought to not go borrowing more water from agriculture. We need to optimize, which means making the best use of the water we do take from nature and put into human use. So agriculture plays a big role in how we manage water. In Utah, that figure runs in any given year from about 75 to 80% of the water we take out of nature, have to rebalance that checkbook, nature's checkbook, doing that, goes into agriculture. And what do we use it for in agriculture? We use it for food production. Let me just ask, the USDA definition of a farmer is someone who grows more than $1,000 worth of value per year. Based on that definition, how many farmers do we have here today? All right. Don't be bashful. Stick those hands up there. Yeah, please. Applaud them. We enjoy our breakfast, don't we? Now, Utah is a net food importer. The United States has been a net food exporter up until the last few years. We are a net food importer now. The United States is. Now, think about the national security implications of that. We've also lost 13,600,000 acres of farmland just from 2014 to 2021, and that trend is continuing. So let me just ask this question. How many of you here live on in a subdivision that used to be a farm? Okay, I want to play this. Yeah, so what we're doing is we're taking our best farmland and putting it in subdivisions, and the water that goes with it. And so we need to make the most of our water and our land. Now I'm going to ask one more question. How many of you live on a farm that used to be a subdivision? In Oasis, USA. My little 6-acre farm used to have 6 houses on it. And we grow alfalfa on that. Ooh, that awful alfalfa that goes into our food chain. Now listen, farmers are businesses. Farms are businesses. They're not movie sets where everything's scripted. They're not a hobby. They're a place where your food is grown, and everything that grows there in Utah goes into the food chain. Utah, so it's a business. It's not somebody's hobby. And when you run a business, what do you respond to? You respond to markets. You can't run your farm based on editorial opinions. You certainly can't run your farm based on activist demands. Now, everybody should have a seat at the table and we should listen to each other, so I'm not criticizing that. But the farmer has to sell into the market and make a living. They have to run a business. And that business in Utah requires water. And Brian, if I'm starting to sound like Dr. Doom, please excuse me. But how we use that water is the key. And we have to make some social choices. And it's going to take all of us sitting at the table and figuring this out. How much do we put into agriculture? What responsibilities does agriculture have? And the legislature made a big bet this year, a very, $200 million bet. And Craig, your team has to basically put this into the ag water optimization bill. Just let me conclude with this. I define optimization as obtaining the greatest benefit from the water used. Do you want to hear the statutory definition of ag water optimization? All right, you're going to have to wake people up. Agricultural water optimization means the implementation of agricultural and water management practices that maintain viable agriculture while reducing water depletion to enhance water availability and minimize impacts on water supply, water quality, and the environment. Farmers are used to doing more with less. Tim is right. As we make our choices, let's at least make them intelligently. Let's keep in mind the role of food in our society and in Utah, and let's make sure we're making the best use of water. And if you can find something more valuable to do with that water, then grow your food. Let's do it. But let's make sure we do it wisely and with good science and with good data and work from there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Warren. Our CEO at R Plus Energies is often quoted as saying, the original multi-generational thinkers are farmers and ranchers. And we have a natural orientation towards sustainability. So I appreciate you drawing that out for us, Warren. I do want to get some reactions from the panel to what you said.
Yeah, I can add to that. I'm a recovering water manager, so the one thing, the habit that breaks the least for water managers is we like to whine about a lot of things, and including what the current year is bringing us, whether it's flood or drought. But there are a couple of things that are of note for farmers in the water chain, if you will, the water supply chain. I can give you an example. In Summit County, there are less farms, as Warren has pointed out, than there used to be. But what we've seen is that yes, the farmer diverts a tremendous amount of the divertible water of Utah into their farms, but no user returns more water back to the natural system than the farmer does of that diversion. And we have to remember, it's not a simple matter of converting farm water over to subdivisions or businesses or industry and think that the impact of the environment is the same. It's not. If we consume more of that diverted water at the new use, then the system suffers. And so be careful in laying this all at the feet of the farmer, because for all the reasons that Warren's already articulated, but including the fact that half of their water generally goes back into the river after they've diverted it.
I just add that there's this really interesting tension that's written into the Farm Bureau policy manual. Warren's going to appreciate this. One of the planks is willing buyer, willing seller, and another of the key planks is no net loss of ag land. Can you tell the tension there? And I think the real challenge for agriculture, and I don't think we've got a good handle on this, is when water is worth 10 times more going to a municipal or an industrial use, or the land is worth 10 or 20 times more, you get this inevitable sort of move in this conversion from agricultural lands to houses. Let me just say that from a water management standpoint, there's only one thing that's worse, and that's where we're building new houses where it used to be sagebrush. Because when we build houses where there used to be sagebrush, that was no demand, and now that means that that water has to come from something else. Strong's law, right? Something's dying. You're taking it for something. You're taking it from another water user, or you're taking it from the environment, but something's going to be impacted. So I think that's a fundamental challenge that ag faces.
Yeah, let me just jump in. Tim's a great thinker, and I don't argue with anything you said. In fact, I want to emphasize something you said. 10 times, water's worth 10 times as much somewhere else than in agriculture. Please define worth.
Yeah, and I just mean the cost on the market, right?
All right,
Not the
fair
value,
enough.
not
All right.
societal value.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to, so maybe can I just take a minute and pull up another slide on the diversion depletion side? And, you know, in listening with Tage and Warren and Tim here, I look at it from an engineering standpoint. How can we engineer a solution to this problem? And I think that the legislature did take a big step, like Warren mentioned, in ag optimization. And one of the things that we really, and Tage pointed at this as well, that one of the things that we need to realize is how interconnected these systems are. And if we have good science, I think that we can engineer ways through saved water and how that can be marketed for whatever the purpose is. But when you look at diversion, like this slide shows, the 3 components that I have to manage is diversion, depletion based on that use, and then return flow to ensure that the in-stream flow, the Great Salt Lake, all of these other elements are kept whole, or as whole as can be, or as unharmed as can be. But maybe I'm a little bit optimistic here, but I really do think we can engineer some solutions to try and address these problems. So I just wanted to share that and share this slide for folks to kind of see what we look at every day. So
Thanks. Let's keep that up, that slide up. We have this very cool shot clock in front of us. I'm showing we've got about just under 20 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I want to hear the great audience questions from here. So I always like to sort of invite what you just mentioned, optimism, to be part of this conversation, because I think it's so important. So what is the best case scenario for the future of water in Utah? And what would all of your respective visions for water in Utah be? Why don't we start with you, Warren, and we can work down the panel, and then I'd ask Jason to please bring up some of the audience questions we've received.
Thank you, Teresa. The best solutions in Utah will be found as collaborative solutions with the stakeholders at the table. It's the very thing that Envision Utah is good at. And we will work out the solutions, we'll make the social choices, and I think with that, we'll see agriculture remain viable. I know that there's a trade-off. We have to understand those trade-offs and make them intelligently. Let's get the data, let's get the stakeholders together, and one thing we learned, I had to bring it, here's the blast from the past. The 2017 book that the water strategy team put together, and I've got Governor Herbert's letter here where he said, let's see, we anticipate that this will take about 1 year and 10 meetings. It took 4 years and literally hundreds of meetings with all of those stakeholders to put it together. That's what it's going to take. So I see us riding out these decadal oscillations in Great Salt Lake and trying to manage the increase in temperatures, the change in precipitation patterns, and so on, and keeping food on the table, keeping our society viable, keeping the dust storms down, and so on. We can do it. Tim was optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic with you, Tim. Thanks.
Thanks, Warren. Just 2 thoughts. One is to understand that water law tends to move at a glacial pace, very incrementally, right? It's kind of by design, right, to be more predictable. I will say that the pace of change, if you want to think about it in those terms, has been breathtaking. When we went through this list of recommendations out of the Recommended State Water Strategy, the number that are either have been accomplished or in the process of being accomplished is extraordinary. And it's amazing to think of all the changes that we've done, largely to do a couple of things: to facilitate the better sharing of water in collaborative, voluntary, and predictive ways. I mean, predictable ways. A lot of the efforts that we've done, water banking, split season leasing, a whole bunch of different things, are all designed to do that, to give agricultural users more options on their water rather than less. And so that's one of the things that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope, and I know it gets maybe overhyped, but this notion of the Utah way. I love the pioneer spirit that animates Utahs. We tend to take the long view, and the other thing we tend to do really well is to work together on difficult problems. If you think about the people that were around that table when we did that strategy, it was this amazingly diverse group of, I mean, they didn't look diverse, but in terms of what they thought and what they believed, it was a very diverse group of people. Yeah, and to hammer out a consensus document, we spent more time trying to think about how to deal with like minority opinions than anything else, and somehow we got a document that everybody was willing to sign on to. And it's endured the test of time because of that, I think because of that pioneer spirit that we have.
So I'll just add, I think day to day, every day, I see conflict, I really do, with the water that we have. There's always one water user over another that is calling us up saying, is this my water or is it theirs? I think that where I have optimism is that seeing these documents and when I see solutions that are brought together by the parties instead of the argument, when Tim talks about how slow the change to water law or water law moves at a glacial pace, well, I think the court system is probably even slower than that. And if we rely on our courts to come up with decisions to solve the problems for us, we're not going to have solutions in decades. And so I really emphasize just working together collaboratively, finding that common ground, and how can this public water, it is the public's water, how can we work together to make sure that we solve the problems ourselves?
Just do a few mentions of good news. Since 2017, when that report was filed, there has been significant progress made on many of these topics that were covered there. That to me is amazing. That was only 6 years ago, and here we are reporting already that there's been progress on a lot of those items. And a lot of credit goes to a lot of folks for doing that. The legislature, I think, as I said earlier, has really stepped up and is working collaboratively with the water managers. Water managers is a general term, by the way, of all of us who are involved in that to seek solutions. Another good news item, before 2000, the population was growing like this, right? Like it always does in this state. The water demand was growing like this. It was almost parallel. If you look since the year 2000 to now, the population is still growing like this, but the water demand is growing like this at the same time. That tells me that water conservation is being applied, and everyone in this room has contributed one way or another and ought to be congratulated for your contributions to using less water per capita than you did just 20 years ago. Those are all good news items. Looking forward, though, as if I can echo everything that's been said, the collaborative concept and progress is the only way that we're going to make any changes here. If we're not standing in the middle and looking at growth and water supply in that regard, agriculture, the environment, industrial, national security was mentioned earlier. All those kinds of things have to be looked at simultaneously. We're not going to get to the right solution. And frankly, anybody who has a myopic view and only has interest in one of those areas ought to be tossed out, because now's the time that we're going to have to consider all of them all at once.
Well, I would just note all four of you use the word collaboration. So let's move forward with that as our charge. We had some great questions come in from the audience, and one thing that I think Envision Utah is really helpful in always reminding us of is we do live in a world of constraints. We live in a real world, right? And so I love this question here, which is pertaining to where do we get the biggest bang for our buck in water conservation? If we had $1 billion to spend on conservation, where would that go? And there's a list here of potential ideas, but I want to leave that question open-ended for you all to respond to.
I'll start us off and initially by pushing back on the question, because I think it flies in the face of kind of that collaborative solution that we're talking about, right? Everybody wants to know the answer to this, and I love it. One of the reasons people say, well, I'm not going to conserve because we're growing alfalfa. Right? And an alfalfa grower, farmer, is saying, well, number one, this is where the economics are. Number two, look at all the water that you're wasting with no economic value, right? It's not I like to say it's not the grass that we use, it's a problem. It's grass we don't use. Look around. All the grass that we never use, nobody ever walks on it except to mow it. That's a problem. But I think what I say, pushing back, is that there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all. If you look the way that the legislature's funded it, they focused on M&I through secondary metering, big investments there, and then big investments in agricultural water optimization, because we know there's a lot of water to be had in that space. But you can see balanced investments, and that's what we need.
Can I maybe add to what Tim said? I 100% agree that I don't like the question either, because the target shouldn't be just on one sector of our population or water use. But I think one area that we can focus on to understand where some savings can come from is in research and technologies, and really focusing on how do we bring some of the best technologies worldwide to Utah to be utilized here, and the research institutions to make sure that we understand how much lawn consumes, how much corn consumes, energy, whatever it is, whatever use that we have in Utah, but to get a better understanding. So I would just say we need to focus on more education, more information, more technology, and research.
May I jump in and leave you the cleanup positions, Tage? Thank you. Tim, I agree that conservation, now farmers tend to do this. They have to see the whole landscape. And you look at what the water cycle is all about, and we're circulating the same water that the dinosaurs had. So when you say water conservation, what does that mean? My definition of water conservation means keeping it at the point in the hydrologic cycle where I want to use it. Optimization means that we're taking the resource and we're making the best use of it for society. And so that's, again, back to the collaborative process. I don't want to discredit the question. It's an excellent question. How do we be really asking, how do we get better at using water? Research, social choices, advances in water law, which are, in my career, I've helped write over 120 water bills. And Tim sponsored at least half of those in his time in the legislature. So we're getting there. But let's make sure that we don't falter now. All right.
Yeah, well, I don't know about cleanup, but Teresa, I was fine with the question, just so I'm on record saying that. I agree with Warren. It is a finite resource, and by the way, that's why it's different than the transportation conversations. Transportation, in my mind, as an engineer, is you put enough money and enough asphalt down, it's going to work. And there doesn't seem to be necessarily a limit to either one of those things right off the bat. So, but water is something that, as Warren mentioned, is in that cycle. It's finite. We're not going to make any more of it. We just need to apply it at the right places in the right times. In terms of water conservation in the traditional sense, where can we make the most impact? In the urban and suburban setting, it's still our yards. Nothing's changed there. We still apply so much of our water by percentage to our yards compared to what we use indoors. Even, Ari, if you have a big family and the shower runs something like 12 hours a day, you're still using more out on your lawns than you are in your yards than you are inside your house. So we know we can still do better there. We've done better, but we need to do even better than that. There are efficiencies and optimizations that can be done in the agricultural applications that need to be pursued and are going to be. And let's not forget the groundwater, Teresa, which is so important to maintaining that baseline, so that we're not mining the water out of the groundwater prism. We can't get to that point for a myriad of reasons. So again, we're back to that collaboration and back to prioritization. But all things have to be considered. But I am still optimistic that we can solve it. I don't want anyone to go away from here thinking it's what Star Trek fans would call the Kobayashi Maru. which is just unsolvable. Anybody that laughs should be ashamed, by the way. But there's some people in this room I've actually had to explain that to in the past. But it's the problem that cannot be solved. I think it's a problem that can be solved and will be because we are Utahns.
Well, we had an individual call to action there and a note of optimism, so I'm going to end it with that. Thank you, Tage, and invite our good friend Luke Kramer to come up and close us out. But before we
Teresa?
do, want to
Can we, Jason, put up the spider, would you please? I took the photo, I wrote the slide, but Teresa does this so much better than I do. Would you please?
Thanks, Warren. Calls me out here. So this slide, actually, that spider is called Drought. She used to live in Oasis, Utah. So Drought still is in Oasis, Utah, but not in that form. She has passed away. But when you really look at these systems and you look at that spider web and you realize how much water is just interconnected, interdependent, and complex and matters to life. And we need to be careful as we move forward. As we pull one strand of that spider web, we're going to pull something with it. And I think that's where collaboration comes into play and working together. So Drought is wonderful in this form.
superb wrap up. Please give me please give our panelists a round of applause.
Well, fellow Utahns and those who are smart enough to come from California, what an audience here today. I had no idea we had so much learning. And one more thanks to Tage, Teresa, Tim, and Warren. That was just, and Teresa, our moderator, that was really informative. So thank you one more time. I took a couple pages of notes, and may I just say, I don't think there's any other group in Utah that could convene this kind of group of experts and to share this kind of information in Envision Utah. So we thank you for this. I learned so much. I want to find out where Oasis, Utah is. We've heard it mentioned several times. It may be one of the most misnamed locations on Earth.
That's what I was going to say. It's not an oasis.
It's southwest of Eureka.
Well, don't let Doug Wright hear all of that. But as we've heard from our panel, there's much work to be done. This is Utah. We will get this done, and it's by this kind of operations we can do it together. I'm in the commercial real estate business. When we run out of every other argument, we just say to the planning commissioner or whoever, this is for the children, and it's for the grandchildren. But you know what? This is for us now. So it was so good to hear this, and for 25 years, Envision Utah has been looking at these big problems, bringing groups together, talking to our citizens, coming up with experts, and coming to recommendations to our incredible legislature. I know a little bit about legislatures. We are so blessed in this state, and I thank those who are here today, and our executive branch as well, and to have Brian Steed jump back in. There's so many ways that Utah is working. Where would you rather live than here? We're in the high desert. We'll take the challenges that we have. And Ari described earlier the kind of process we're doing now on research to build consensus and understanding by our fellow citizens. People asked me one time, how many people work with Envision Utah? And I said, 3.4 million. We're all in this together, and that's the beauty of the Utah way, and I appreciated the comments from the panel about that. I'm also a state transportation commissioner, and I appreciate over the years what we've done about transportation, air quality, education, infrastructure, and population growth. This all works together in a very exciting way. And we're going to make it happen. I was sitting there taking notes thinking that if I were an alfalfa grower or a golfer, or if I brushed my teeth too long, or I took too long of showers, or I washed my, we're all going to have some problems, but we can work this out together. And Envision Utah will help us build support among our fellow citizens for conservation and other things. I grew up in Mesa, Arizona. Water is life, is what I heard as a kid, you know. Arizona grows where water flows. It's the same story here. I think Utah is an oasis compared to Arizona, so we can make it happen. Well, we need to deal with it right, and so we want to thank our generous sponsors again for making this happen, for each of you for coming. The panel, the moderator, Ari and his incredible staff, it's all part of us working together to make this happen. We talk about that it is important how we grow. It's very important how we grow our consensus and our support. And my job and opportunity is to remind us money helps water flow. And all of you have seen this, we need your support. We have a motto, give until it hurts, and then just keep giving some more until it feels better. So Envision Utah would be a proud recipient of that kind of support, because where else are we going to have this kind of expertise, objective, transparent, cooperative, communicative collaboration than this? I am really delighted all that I learned this morning about water. No more teeth brushing, no more showers. My kids would like that. But it is done for the children, it is done for our future, and we're going to do it together because we're Utahns. So huge thanks again for coming. Remember who you'd like to support in your next time you brush your teeth. Think maybe I ought to write a check so we can keep brushing teeth and washing cars. Thank you all for coming, and let's go Utah. Thank you so much. Luke. It's always good to see you. Excellent. Good to see you again. Farmland Reserve is kind of what you're doing. Hey, thank you. You're the man.